Good morning. This past semester, back in the spring, I was actually on a little bit of a research sabbatical that the university granted me, and as a result, I had a little bit more free time on my hands. There was a period when I was down in Philadelphia and I was out with one of my friends for dinner. I would not particularly describe this person as devout or pious, but he is a believer. And as we were having dinner, I could see that his eyes were resting on my medals that I wear. Around my neck, I actually have 3 medals that I wear. One is the cross, and another is, of course, the Miraculous medal, and the third is a little medal of St. Michael the Archangel. And of course, since my name is Michael, I sort of think of Michael the Archangel as something of a patron. And he wanted to see the medals. And they were on a very sort of thin and delicate chain. And so as I was taking the medal off to show him, the chain broke. Medals fell on the floor. And the next day, I went to Macy's, which is, as you know, at 13th and Market. And I went to the counter and I told the woman that I was looking for, a chain. And she wanted some kind of a description of what I was looking for. And I took out the 3 medals and I placed them on the counter in front of her. And I said, well, it has to be a chain that is sort of strong enough to hold these medals and so that it won't break very easily. And when I placed the 3 medals there, the cross and the Miraculous medal and St. Michael the Archangel, she looked at them and she said, oh, they're lovely. She said, tell me about your charms. She was an older person, and I was in a little bit of a playful mood, and I said, well, I'm witty, I'm very good-looking, I can be bright on occasion, and I'm going through all this list of things, and she sort of looked at me and she said, no, dear, I'm not talking about those charms. I'm talking about those charms. And she pointed to the medals. And I found myself in Macy's at the jewelry counter doing a little bit of, I guess you would call it, evangelizing and catechesis on the meaning of sacramentals. And the reason I mention this is the topic that Father Pieber asked me to preach on today, or to say something about, is really sacramentals, and particularly the Miraculous medal. And of course, whenever I think about that, and for various reasons, my thoughts sort of drift back to my dad. He was a great wearer of the Miraculous medal, and as a matter of fact, it was he who, when I was a kid, brought me to this shrine almost every Monday, because we lived simply right around the bend, and we could catch the K-bus and come over here very easily. But my thoughts also drifted to him because yesterday, had he lived, October the 13th, would have been his 102nd birthday. He died about 20 years ago now. And I remember at the time, not long after he had received his diagnosis, that I had gone with him to the doctors. And I remember it rather well because I put my collar on. And anybody that knows me knows I only put my collar on when I absolutely have to. But I thought to myself, this might sort of force the doctor to be honest with me. And at one point, my dad had to leave the room, and I said to the doctor, I said, be honest with me. I said, how long does he have to live? What do you think? And the doctor was rather hesitant, but he said, well, Father, I think he probably has somewhere between 6 and 18 months. As it turned out, he lived quite a bit longer. He lived really 5 to 6 years beyond that. But that night, I remember going home, and I had a little bit of a heart-to-heart with God, and in my hubris, I sort of gave God 2 options. I said, either heal him either miraculously or through, his treatment, or take him quickly and painlessly. God didn't answer either one of those prayers. But what I noticed in the ensuing years is that my dad became a different person. He was not a bad person. He was always a good father, but he was not particularly affectionate. And during those ensuing years, he became a different type of person. He suddenly became a great hand holder and a great sayer of things like, "I love you." But I remember at one point, about 7 or 8 months into his treatment, we came home, and we were sitting across at the dining room table. I think I had made something of a frozen TV dinner for him, and I could see that he was in extraordinary pain. And I said to him, "Dad, when you found out that you were sick, what did you pray for?" And he said, "Well, Mike, I prayed for 2 things, I think. One was time to let my kids know that I love them, and also for the grace to endure, to get through this." And I looked at him and I said, "How do you do it?" And he said to me, "I find that a rather odd question coming from a priest." And I was younger and fresher then, and I said to him, "I never particularly said I was a good priest, not even a pious priest. I've only ever claimed to have been validly ordained." But he clutched his miraculous medal that was always around his neck, and he pointed into the living room where we had sort of a cabinet full of what I would call religious tchotchkes. There were like old crosses made of palm from past Palm Sundays, and several little statues of St. Francis of Assisi, mostly belonging to me, and some images of the Blessed Mother. And he said to me, "My faith, it's my faith that gets me through." And to be honest with you, my brothers and sisters, when I think of sacramentals, and particularly the miraculous medal, it seems to me that in the long and the short of it, what they're really about is faith, and putting us in touch with the mystery of the divine, and more importantly, with the mystery of divine mercy and divine love. In the end, it seems to me that that's really what it's all about. As we all know, the Church teaches that sacramentals are different than sacraments. Sacramentals are recognized by the Church, whereas sacraments are instituted by Christ. Sacramentals dispose one to grace and faith, whereas sacraments actually confer grace on the individual. They're different. You might say that sacramentals are more modest. They're more humble. They're simple. It's rather interesting that in today's gospel, which is drawn from the 11th chapter of St. Luke, as my students would say, it seems that our Lord Jesus is on a little bit of a jag. He's on a little bit of a rip about people who search for signs. And we have to understand what it is that Jesus is getting at in today's gospel. He is very frustrated. The crowds are growing larger, but they're growing larger for the wrong reasons. They're growing larger because they're looking for something that's extraordinary. They want miracles. They want marvelous displays of power. And the truth of the matter is, Jesus is too ordinary and too simple for them. And in a sense, that ultimately is his problem, and that ultimately is more often than not what God's love is like. It's sort of like a sacramental, sort of like the miraculous medal. Simple, modest, and close to the heart. Last week I was out with our superior and I was in a bookstore, and as I was leaving the bookstore I happened to pass a little display of poetry books. And there was a book there by an Irish poet, Seamus Heaney. I remembered the name because one of my professors at Catholic University, he used to read from Seamus Heaney's poetry in class. And so I began to page through it. And I came upon the following little poem that's entitled Miracle. And I think it pretty much captures what I'm trying to say about sacramentals, ultimately. It's about the miracle of the curing of the paralytic, the man who couldn't move, but because of Jesus, suddenly he can move. And this is how Seamus Heaney puts it. He says, not the one who takes up his bed and walks, but the ones who have known him all along and carry him in. Their shoulders numb, the ache and stoop, the blocked in their backs, the stretcher handles slipping with sweat and no let up, until he's strapped and tight, made tiltable, and raised to the tiled roof and lowered for healing. Be mindful of them as they stand and wait for the burn of the paid-out ropes to cool their slight lightheadedness and incredulity to pass. Those who knew him all along. The point is well taken. There are two miracles in that story. The miracle of the man who was paralytic and who could move suddenly because of Jesus' word, and the miracle of those friends who simply and humbly and modestly carried him to Jesus. When I think about the Miraculous medal, I think about something that's like that. It's one woman sitting in a chair, talking to another woman. She doesn't ask for a great cathedral to be constructed, but simply for a medal to be struck. She doesn't talk about marvelous happenings and great miracles. She talks about mercy and grace. It's a simple medal for simple people. And that's no small things. Because remember, as the theologians remind us, God is the simplest of all. So let's wear our medal with modesty and humility and faith, because it's the chain to God's love and God's mercy and Mary's love and Mary's mercy.